There's a problem that ruins more camps than rain, cold, or even the lack of food during a night in the wilderness. Insects, mosquitoes, gnats, black flies, and small flying parasites seem to appear exactly at the moment you try to relax by the campfire. You set up your tent near a quiet lake, prepare the fire, and sit down to enjoy the silence of the forest as the sun disappears behind the trees. But a few minutes later, you start to hear that sound every camper immediately recognizes, a constant buzzing very close to your ear. First, one mosquito appears, then another, and then many more, until it seems like the entire forest decided to visit you at the same time. Most people believe that the only way to solve this problem is by using strong chemical repellents or special candles that promise to keep insects away. But for centuries, explorers, hunters, and some indigenous peoples used much simpler methods to reduce the presence of insects around the camp. One of those methods involves something extremely common that many people have at home, a simple copper wire. And the most surprising thing is that this small trick can cost less than... Before understanding how this curious survival experiment works, you first need to understand why insects appear so easily around camps. Most of the insects that bother you during a night outdoors, especially mosquitoes, do not appear randomly. In reality, they are following invisible signals that guide them directly toward humans. The first signal is the carbon dioxide we release every time we breathe. Each person exhales a small cloud of carbon dioxide that slowly disperses into the air around the camp. Mosquitoes are capable of detecting this gas at distances that can exceed 20 meters. That means a mosquito can locate your camp even before you see it flying near you. The second signal is the body heat emitted by the human body. Insects have extremely sensitive sensors capable of detecting small differences in temperature in the environment. A warm human body in the middle of a cool environment works like a very clear signal for them. The third signal is the natural smell of human skin. Sweat, the bacteria that naturally live on the skin, and certain chemical compounds create an aroma that many insects use to locate their victims. When you combine carbon dioxide, body heat, and human scent, you create something like an invisible beacon in the middle of the forest. That beacon is exactly what guides insects toward your camp. That is why even a clean and well-organized campsite can end up surrounded by mosquitoes when night falls. For decades, the insect repellent industry has developed increasingly complex chemical solutions to combat this problem. Spray repellents, special candles, electronic devices, and chemical bracelets promise to keep insects away for hours. Today, the global insect repellent market moves billions of dollars every year around the world. But many experienced campers have discovered something interesting after years of observing nature. Some extremely simple methods can reduce the presence of insects without the need for expensive products. One of these curious methods involves the use of certain metals around the campsite. Copper, in particular, has been used for centuries in different situations related to insects and small animals. In traditional agriculture, for example, copper has been used to create barriers that certain insects and mollusks avoid crossing. Many gardeners place copper tapes around pots or gardens to prevent slugs and snails from approaching plants. Researchers have also observed that some insects react strangely when they come into contact with certain metals. Copper can generate small natural electrical differences when it interacts with soil moisture. Although this effect is extremely small and completely safe for humans, it can alter the behavior of some insects. This led some curious campers to try a very simple experiment, placing a copper wire forming a small perimeter around the area where they sit or around the camp table. The idea was to observe whether this small detail could influence the presence of insects near the camp. At first, many thought it was just a coincidence or a camper's superstition, but after repeating the experiment in different places, they began to notice something interesting. In some camps, the number of insects seemed to decrease slightly when the copper wire surrounded the area where people gathered. They did not disappear completely, but the behavior seemed to change. Some insects avoided crossing directly over the wire, or simply flew around the perimeter without getting too close. This sparked the curiosity of many camping and outdoor survival enthusiasts, because if a simple, inexpensive wire could alter the behavior of some insects, it was worth investigating further. But the important question was another one. Does this trick really work under real camping conditions, or is it simply a coincidence that some people interpret it as a solution? To answer that question, some campers decided to do something very simple. Compare two different camps under the same conditions, one with a copper wire surrounding the resting area, and another camp without any kind of barrier. The results of these small tests in nature were much more interesting than many expected, because although copper does not eliminate all insects, it seems to create a small effect that can change the way some of them approach the campsite. And understanding why this happens reveals something very interesting about how insects perceive the world around them. To understand why a simple copper wire can influence the behavior of some insects, you first need to observe how these small animals perceive their environment. Unlike humans, many insects use combinations of chemical, thermal, and electrical signals to navigate their surroundings. Mosquitoes, for example, not only detect carbon dioxide or body heat, but also react to very small changes in the static electricity of the air. In nature, there are extremely weak electric fields generated by the interaction between the ground, moisture, and materials found on the surface. Copper is one of the most conductive metals in nature, which means it can easily interact with small natural electrical currents. When a copper wire comes into contact with moist ground or the humidity of the night air, an extremely small electrical difference can be generated. That change is completely imperceptible to humans and poses no risk, but some insects seem capable of detecting minimal variations in these natural electrical fields. Researchers have observed in several studies that certain insects alter their trajectory when they encounter metallic surfaces or electrical changes in the environment. It is not a magical barrier that insects cannot cross, but it can act as a small interference in their natural behavior. This means that some insects simply change their path or stay slightly away from the area where they perceive that signal. In a small campsite, even a moderate reduction in the number of insects can make a big difference during the night. For that reason, some campers began testing a very simple setup using copper wire around the area where they rest. The setup is extremely simple and does not require complicated tools or technical knowledge. First, you take a simple copper wire, like those used in household electrical installations. Then you form a circle, or perimeter, around the area where the camp table or chairs are located. The wire can be placed directly on the ground or slightly elevated using small wooden stakes. The idea is not to create a physical fence, but simply to mark a conductive perimeter around the resting area. In many cases, campers place the wire in a circle of approximately 2 to 3 meters in diameter. That size is usually enough to surround the area where people sit near the campfire. As night falls, the copper begins to interact with the natural humidity of the environment. This interaction can generate small electrical variations in the immediate surroundings of the campsite. Although the effect is extremely subtle, some insects seem to react to that difference. In several informal tests carried out by campers, the number of mosquitoes within the perimeter appeared to be slightly lower than in nearby areas without copper. This does not mean that all insects disappear, but even a partial reduction can make the camping experience much more comfortable. It is also important to understand that this trick works best when combined with other simple camping practices. For example, avoiding leaving food scraps near the resting area helps reduce the presence of flies and other insects. Keeping the campsite relatively dry can also decrease mosquito activity. Choosing locations with a light natural breeze can help disperse the carbon dioxide that attracts insects. When these small strategies are combined, the result can be surprisingly effective. Many campers discover that they can spend the night by the fire with fewer insect disturbances, and all thanks to a small experiment that costs less than a cup of coffee. You don't need to buy expensive electronic devices or harsh chemical repellents. You just need to better understand how insects interact with their environment. Nature is full of small details that can make a big difference when you spend time outdoors. A simple copper wire will not eliminate all insects from the forest, but it can help tilt the balance slightly in your favor during a night of camping. And sometimes that small change is enough to transform a night full of buzzing and bites into a much more peaceful experience. Because in the world of camping and survival, small practical knowledge is often far more valuable than the most expensive gear, and many of these simple ideas have existed for generations without most people knowing about them. The next time you set up your camp in the middle of the forest, you can try this small experiment yourself. You might discover that something as simple as a copper wire can make the night a little quieter. And in nature, sometimes the simplest solutions are the ones that work best. Yeah,